Hi, everybody. My name, as you know, is Claire Ross, and I work for Shared Parenting Scotland. And I've been with them for about 3 years, and I've been working on the training side of things for about that time as well. I've got a background in community development. I've been a family mediator for a period of time. I'm a person-centered counsellor, and at the moment, actually, I'm training in something called cognitive behavioural therapy, which is also really interesting. I'm also a New Ways for Families coach. So because I have a focus on the training, I know the sort of training inside out and how it works with the parents that we offer it to. So what are we going to do today? So I'm going to do a little bit about the charity and what we do and who we do it with. But then basically I'm going to then focus pretty much on the training aspect of things, and really to sort of outline how Shared Parenting Scotland supports parents that are going through high conflict separations. And unfortunately, just the times that we live, this seems to be more and more common. We'll be looking at the challenges of shared parenting, especially when parents don't get on, and the importance of positive communication and how to encourage resolution in families that are going through these breakups. So we do this throughout all of our work, but what we really see the changes are within the training programs. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Shared Parenting Scotland. So as you can see, these are our aims, and at the centre of everything that we do, we put the interests of children foremost. And we're looking at achieving better outcomes for children and families, and we promote shared parenting because we believe that it's really important for children to have both parents in their lives. There's more and more evidence that supports that, and we are moving towards giving parents a sort of equal status in that. So we have a sort of two-pronged attack in what we do. We have a helpline, which is nearly sort of full-time. We have group support meetings for parents throughout Scotland, across the 5 cities. We in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee, and Stirling. And then linked to those support meetings, we have WhatsApp apps where parents can network together. They can share experiences, tips on parenting, what to do with their kids in the holidays, and also to share what they're going through and to give recommendations to other parents. Our website is pretty comprehensive, and there's lots of publications on there. We do a lot of interesting work internationally in particular. So there's a lot of really interesting recorded stuff about how people are approaching shared parenting right across the world. And obviously there's particularly interesting work happening in Scandinavia, but all over Europe and also in parts of America as well. And then lastly, we take the feedback that we get from the sort of frontline work that we do, and we use that to influence policy work and to lobby. So we are the secretariat for the Shared Parenting cross-party group with the Scottish Parliament. We try to influence courts and local authorities, organisations like SLAB, and we want really to try and move away from this adversarial process and actually to catch things right at the beginning of the process before they become formal, before people get lawyers involved, start court proceedings. That is the time that we want to really kind of be working with people at that point. So as you can see, we're really busy. We have a lot of people getting in contact with us, loads of people coming to the helpline. We've got over 35,000 visitors to our website, lots of interaction on social media, and people now coming back to the group meetings. The group meetings are face-to-face, and obviously in COVID we went completely online, but now what we're finding week on week, that people are attending the actual face-to-face meetings, and those meetings are attended by a family lawyer. So that support is there. We work with about 45 legal firms across Scotland, and we just, they come in on a pro bono basis. So we're really grateful to that working relationship with the legal system in Scotland that we have. And I would say, actually, we've probably, from these figures, you could probably add about 12 or 15% onto that in the last year. So you can see that we are very busy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the two training programs that we do, and we'll just talk through that a little bit. And just to say that Shared Parenting Scotland, we work mainly with dads and fathers. So 75% of all our service users are men. They can be grandfathers, other family members. And we've got a growing, since we used to be Families Need Fathers, and since we've changed the branding to be Shared Parenting Scotland, we work a lot more with women. And that's a kind of growing percentage as well. So we work with about 26% women at the moment. And that can also include very often new partners who get involved, grandparents, and obviously mothers and siblings and all sorts. So I'm going to just focus in a little bit on New Ways for Families. So New Ways for Families is a parenting skills course, and it was developed in the US by the High Conflict Institute. So the clue is in the name of what we're going to be working with here. Bill Eddy is one of the founders of the New Ways for Families approach, and it also includes meditation and counselling models as well. And Bill is a really fascinating person. He started off as a nursery teacher, he was telling me. We worked quite closely with him. And then he went on to be a family mediator, he's a family lawyer, and he's also a family therapist. So he's a triple threat, really, as far as knowing how to support separating families. And he has got a real interest and ability to work with high conflict cases. So this training and this approach has come out of kind of his experience. The training is online, and it says 12 here, but it's actually 10 models. We've tweaked it a little bit, and it's supported by 3 coaching sessions. And the coaching sessions are really important because they embed the learning of the learner. The learners can do it at any time of day because it's online. They can do it in the evening. They can work it around busy schedules. And then they'll have 3 sessions of an hour to an hour and a half with a coach. And our coaches are extremely experienced. A lot of them are family lawyers. We also have psychotherapists. We also have family therapists. We also have family lawyers who are family therapists. So a wide range, people with social work backgrounds are a wide range of people with lots of experience of working with separating families. Okay, so what does the training hope to achieve when it comes to working with conflict resolution? So, I mean, the big thing is that really it gives parents a chance to change. And by change, I mean the behaviors and how they are before making big decisions. So really what we do, first of all, is just take a step back and think, well, what makes a high conflict personality? What are the sort of red flags that do that? And one of the things that we look at is things like instant blame. So somebody who is really sort of keen to make sure that nobody thinks that anything is their fault. It's always the fault of the other person. They don't take responsibility for their actions. Then we have unmanaged emotions. These are also very quickly falling into anger or victimhood or controlling behavior. And then also extreme behaviors, and this can be being aggressive, being threatening, and it can also culminate in things like domestic violence. And then finally, this kind of all or nothing thinking. So it's very black and white. Again, it's a bit like the blame thing. It's everything is this way and nothing is the other way. So these are the sort of traits that we look for when we're looking at a high conflict situation. Another thing that we do when we're working with high conflict families is we actually, and Bill has talked a lot about this, is how the actual brain works and why people then start demonstrating these kind of extreme behaviors. And this is not, so basically we look at the brain, and there are 2 halves of the brain. There's the left side of the brain, which is problem solving. It's kind of rational, it's scientific, tends to be sort of planning bit, thinks in words and language. It's kind of the scientific sort of like bit of the brain. And then the other side of the brain, and this often comes into play, obviously, in high conflict situations, is the right side, which is more reactive. Now, the right side of the brain has lots of really interesting qualities. That's where imagination is kind of housed, creativity. So a lot of artists or musicians quite often live quite close to this part of their sort of part of their brain. But it also houses things like hurt and anger and fear, where a lot of the sort of high conflict behavior can come from that, come from anxiety, where people feel overwhelmed. So it's about, actually, the training is really about getting one part of the brain to talk to the other. So we're getting the left brain, the sort of rational bit, to talk to the other, to the other bit that is more scared, more aggressive, and more likely to exhibit some of these sort of extreme sort of behavior sort of patterns. So at the core of the training are these 4 big skills. And the first one is, again, it's responding to these extreme emotions. We look at managing emotions. And high emotions are very understandable in family breakdown. There's a lot of stress going around. And what we do in the training is we look at controlling anger. We look at sadness and fear and anxiety so that people don't overreact to the communications that are going back and forward. We look at moderating behaviors, so we encourage people to identify when they're using and avoid strong language and unreasonable parenting requests, and how they respond to hostile communications, as to avoid escalating the conflict. So I'm going to talk you through some of the tools that we use. I mean, the last one in this is just checking yourself. So it's just really reminding yourself, even when things are really stressful, to use these other 3 skills, to go back into your center, to take a breath and start using these other skills. So I'm just going to sort of unpack some of what these things are. So when dealing with high conflict people, we use something called EAR, or EAR for short. And that comprises of empathy, attention, and respect. So an example of communicating using these sort of qualities is, I can appreciate your frustration. So you're acknowledging the empathy, as you're acknowledging how somebody else is feeling. This is a very impactful thing in your life. Don't worry, I will pay you full attention. So the other person knows that they are being listened to. And that's really important to people that are high conflict. I have a lot of respect for your commitment to solving this problem and look forward to solving it too. So it's about showing respect, and it's also about showing commitment to collaborative working on solving the issues. And any one of these sentences, obviously, you can use. But the fears that high conflict people have is that they will feel that they're being ignored. So when you bury down into why there's a lot of high conflict behavior, it's often feeling ignored. They feel inferior. They don't like feeling inferior. They feel dominated. They prefer to be the one that's in control. They feel abandoned and feel betrayed. And the responses that we teach are sort of using sort of communications. We're almost communicating to that fear and actually trying to allay it. And so it's, things like, I want to help you, respecting their efforts. This other thing about paying attention, listening, acknowledging the fact that they're frustrated without going into the emotions of it. And, and then this collaborative sort of working approach. I'll work with you on this. So when using EAR, what's really important is it's fine to use the words, but the body language and the facial expressions have to match up with that. So when we do a lot of role play as coaches with the learners, we take life situations from what's going on with them, and we do the role playing and get them to sort of practice the skills that we're actually teaching. So anyway, facial expression and body language is 70% apparently of what people pick up from communication. So it's really important that those match what's being said, the tone is correct, and that they're trying to keep a sort of an atmosphere of calm. The next bit that I'm going to have a quick look at is the skill is looking at analyzing options. So that's about sort of flexible thinking. And that's very much about, this thing that there's more than one option that people can actually look at. And in high conflict situations, it's really not about focusing on the feelings, because you're not going to be resolving the issues, and especially when you're looking at issues to do with your children. Acknowledge the issues and then talk to the right brain, talk to the anger and the fear and the anxiety. And instead of focusing on what's upsetting the person, it's basically about choice. So the goal is to get people focused on problem solving, away from their emotions. This puts the responsibility on the person to really get in there and help with the problem. And it also puts responsibility on the person for making the choices. It gives them some power when they perhaps feel quite powerless. So when we're talking about making proposals, we'll be looking at the who, what, when, how, and where. And we'll be asking questions. When the other person asks questions about the proposal that's being put forward, then asking questions like, well, what's your picture of what that would look like? How would that play out? Can you, what do you see, what do you see me doing in more detail? How would that start in your proposal? How many weeks? And then we ask the person, so one person's giving the proposal, and then the other person, once they've sort of asked the questions and explored that a little bit, they respond to the proposal, yes, no, or I'll think about it. So we don't open up a Pandora's box of who said what to who, or going back into people's previous dysfunctional way of being with each other. So if it's a no, then we just ask the person who's making the proposal to make another one. And that's the way that we actually move forward with that. So, these photographs are what happens potentially when an ex sends a confrontational text or email at 1 o'clock in the morning after drinking half a bottle of wine or 6 packs of lager and watching reruns of Jeremy Kyle show. It's quite often that you will be, people will be sent really difficult communications at really difficult times in the day, and you will not be able to stop yourself from reading them. But it's really important to actually take a breath, sit on it, not respond to it in the moment when you're feeling either anxious or angry, but to take a bit of time just to collect your thoughts and think about how you're going to respond, if you're going to respond at all. And so one of the key tools that we use is something called BIF. And BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So the brief bit is, again, it's about keeping it brief. It's long explanations and arguments about things trigger people that have a tendency to be high conflict or like a lot of drama. So it's keeping that communication short. Now, BIF works really well. I think it works particularly well with written communications, so texts and emails and stuff like that. It's very good for that. But also it begins to show a way of actually also sort of using it for sort of verbal communications as well. The informative bit is really, you're just really keeping the information there, not talking about other things, not getting back into previous arguments or emotions or defending yourself. You don't need to. So it's really about keeping it to task. And also very much about focusing on the kids. So it's really important that you're bringing that back in. It's not about the previous relationship that the parents had. It's very much about the relationship that is going forward, that is keeping the children at the heart of everything. The friendly bit is really important. That's about being respectful again. It's quite important not to be too friendly, as that begins to blur the boundaries maybe again. So it's just, giving people, it's just giving people the courtesy that you would give anybody. So a friendly greeting, and then maybe say have a nice weekend or have a good evening or whatever. So it's keeping it business, but not unfriendly or hostile. And then the last bit is around sort of firm. So we encourage parents to end the communication sort of clearly, and also to hold their ground if they need to. And also if there's something that comes in, giving sort of, for example, 2 choices, maybe to a question that comes in, and then asking for a certain date to have a response from it. So again, it's just keeping it on track. And what Bill says, and I think this is quite useful, is we don't do, with BIF, we don't do any admonishments. So we're not going to give anybody a row using the communications for other kind of hidden or unhidden agendas. We don't give advice because particularly people that are feeling sensitive can very often take that the wrong way. And also no apologies, because giving an apology then also again opens up a whole portal of conversations about who did what to who. So I'm going to give you some sort of key sort of pointers, which also come out of the training. And so the first one is really to try and avoid giving parties insight into themselves. I mean, I know this sounds counterintuitive, and we work also with psychotherapists, and we have to actually bring them also back because they're quite often quite keen to talk about people's past, but we don't want to do that with the people that are doing our course. We want to keep them in the here and now. We want them moving forward in this new relationship that they have with their partner, which is very much about co-parenting their children. So if you are asking yourself, this is what we say, you know, how can I make him see what he's doing, or how can I make her understand her part? Forget about that bit. This is just focusing on the choices and the and what you're doing around creating parenting schedules, for example, around, you know, for the welfare of your children. So very much not doing that. And then again, tip 2 is about avoiding sort of emotional confrontations or even focusing on feelings. And again, with our coaching, they very often do hear a little bit about the background. They'll acknowledge the feelings that are going on, but then they'll very quickly move it on to learning the skills that help with having your children at the heart of that. So again, with high conflict people, they don't grieve and heal loss sometimes, and that can be in relationship to the old relationship, which is now gone. In some ways, it's dead. And quite often, the sort of normal stages of sort of grief process. This is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Some of you might have come up against this. It's about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. That's a sort of circular sort of process of people coming to terms with, quite often with death, but also with death of a relationship. And high conflict people, quite often they get stuck in anger within that cycle. So they carry around unresolved emotions. And this, you know, and this feeds into, you know, difficult scenarios, difficult ways of communicating. And so, you know, if you're wanting to focus on the positive, solutions-focused communication, then it's all about kind of going forward and looking to the future. So what we do with our coaches is we avoid emphasizing the past and we emphasize the future instead, because that's what we can impact on. That's what we've got control over. And quite often, as I say, they are stuck in the past. They endlessly repeat the past and justify their own actions and blaming others for theirs. So it's very much about, as I say, moving people on. What I think is really interesting from a coach's perspective is that very often, if I'm working with a learner, it's all about the other parent and what happened and what they did and whatever. With some of my learners, they themselves are potentially high conflict personalities. And I've noticed a couple where the penny has dropped and they've said to me, oh God, Claire, I do that as well. So it can be a highly effective tool in actually getting people to have insight into their own difficult behavior. And that can be a very powerful turning point in getting parents to communicate much more positively with each other. So anyway, an overall sort of what is good from New Ways for Families. We immunize families against becoming high conflict families. It strengthens both parents' abilities to make parenting decisions. That's really important for them and also for their kids. It's also got this kind of knock-on effect so that parents then rely less on experts and courts to make decisions for them. And this obviously, again, has the knock-on effect of saving them a huge amount of money, because we know that some of our clients have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds in court. So it's very much about trying to get them to avoid that if they possibly can. It assists professionals in courts to assess parents' potential and to learn new positive ways of problem solving. And it helps professional in the courts avoid creating an all bad parent and an all good parent. It helps parents teach their children skills for resilience in time of huge and rapid change. So what they learn for talking to the other parent, they can also use these skills when talking to their children. And what we have noticed in the evaluation that we've done in the training is that there's been an improvement in the relationship between the parents and their kids. And I think that that's because they are getting much more self-awareness about how they actually impact on their children. I mean, just one thing to say is that children growing up in a high conflict situation is very difficult for them and it can be extremely traumatic. It can have an effect on their lives going into adulthood. where they don't have positive role models to make their own relationships, and it can have an impact on their economic success and all sorts of aspects of their life. And it also finally gives parents a chance to change in course cases of abuse or alienation before making long-term court orders. So all things that are really, really helpful. So we have evaluated the project. So there's a couple of slides just talking a little bit about the feedback. We did a completely neutral and third-party evaluation with a university in Canada with Dr. Jeff Chang. And that was one of the things that we actually fed back to the Scottish Parliament at the end of May last year. So the feedback has been incredibly positive, and particularly about the mix of online learning and coaching. We changed the material a little bit because of the US issues, and 100% of the learners said they would recommend it to other parents. So I think, again, it gives the learners a chance really to get into the driving seat with things, not just being sort of like a passenger in their own nightmare. And it also gets them to think about acting more in their children's interest, which I think is really important. The coaches also have really got a huge amount of doing that. We have a sort of bi-monthly sort of supervision session with them. So we're constantly looking at what we're doing with learners and we're improving the practice. And we also have regular coaching. We have regular sort of supervision sessions with Bill Eddy in the US. That's also every second month as well. And that's also hugely beneficial. So, as a group, they reported better parenting performance, as I was saying. And they both emphasise the importance of early intervention. The earlier that you can get people to come and do this kind of training, the better it really is. And we have had referrals from, we're early days of the training, but we have had referrals through the judiciary system, both in Scotland and also in England and Wales. So for New Ways for Families, we actually cover the whole of the UK. So that is that particular training. And then the final one that I'm going to look at is, it kind of is a sort of, it's a suite of training, and this is kind of the other kind of half of things. And this training is called Love, Loss and Living, and we've developed this ourselves actually in Shared Parenting Scotland with a psychotherapist called Jan Montgomery, very experienced psychotherapist. And again, what we took from New Ways for Families was that this combination of online training and coaching is highly effective. And with Love, Loss and Living, it's very much about parents who have little or no contact with their children. And really what they're going through is a sort of, it's a form of kind of living bereavement in some ways, because they maybe don't see their children, but they're not in their life anymore. In some ways, it's almost easier when somebody dies. When somebody is still in your life, that kind of bereavement is not acknowledged by society in the same way as somebody actually dying. So it's extremely, we do have a lot of coaching sessions with this training, because the material is quite emotional, and we find that people need a sort of safe space, which they can think about the experience of being separated from their children, but they can acknowledge the pain and the distress of not seeing them. And it's the coaching is group, and that is also highly beneficial for parents to see, to come in contact with other parents that are going through the same thing, and hear their stories and know that they're not alone in all of this. So the love bit in Love, Loss and Living is about sort of reconnecting with their children and how the separation impacts on them. So it's acknowledging sort of what they're kind of going through. And that's a couple of sessions. And then we have a big session. We have sort of 3 sort of modules in the middle, which is about love, which is about loss. And that's really about connecting with the grief that people are going through and learning how to manage it. So there's lots of extremely practical tools. So it's tool heavy, this training, for people to use. It might be that not all the tools are appropriate for everybody, but people that we've done it with have found things that they found incredibly helpful. And then the last bit of the training is around is around people looking after themselves. Quite often when you're going through this kind of intense loss, people can kind of let go of that. So it's about self-care, it's about developing mental health resilience, and it's about looking to future strategies so that if and when parents get back in contact with their children, they're in a good place to hopefully to restart those kind of relationships. So that is most of it. That's all of it about the training that I was going to say today. Just to let you know, there's a slide that's got all our sort of contact details, and I think that Fathers Network Scotland will be sending out both this presentation and leaflets for all the training that we do. So I think that that is it at the moment. That's the details of the organisation. And now I'll come back into the room if anybody's got any questions.